Once the yoke is big enough, now we can separate the sleeves and continue on for the body of the sweater. We'll begin this row by knitting up to the first stitch marker. And depending on what row you're on, that's whatever you'll do, continuing the design of the garter and the stockinette. And this time we're going to knit up right to the marker without any increases. Now we can remove the marker. And now we're going to take a needle and a piece of yarn that's a different color than what's on the needle now. So I'm going to use the brown. Cut off a piece from the end. And now we're going to place all of these stitches from the sleeve up until the next stitch marker onto this piece of yarn. So carefully, so that we shouldn't drop any stitches, we're going to transfer them from the knitting needle onto the needle and the piece of yarn. When you reach the next marker, we can remove it. And now we're going to tie a knot with this yarn just so that the stitches shouldn't fly off, and they'll stay on this piece of yarn until we're ready to pick them back up to make the sleeve. There we go. Now we'll continue the row, which will be now for the back of the sweater. So just continue knitting normally until the next marker. And here we'll do exactly the same as we did on the first sleeve. So taking the needle and another little piece of yarn. And now transfer all the stitches from the second sleeve onto the piece of yarn. And finish off the row. So now that we have the sleeves removed, we can continue knitting back and forth to make the body of the sweater, and continuing with the design of changing color and type of stitch every 6 rows. So I'll meet you back when the sweater is long enough. Here I've gotten the length that I need for the body of the sweater, and now I'm holding at the bottom. We can now cut the second color. So for me it's the brown. I'm going to cut it off because we won't need it anymore. And now with this first color, for me it's green, we're going to make a few rows of ribbing just like we did here at the beginning. Here we've done 6 rows of ribbing, so we're going to do the same on the bottom. And I do suggest beginning the ribbing after you've done 1 row of back and forth on the stockinette stitch, because then it'll make the ribbing look neater and nicer. So we'll just do a 2 knit 2 purl for 6 rows just like we did on the top. Once we've finished the ribbing, now we can cast off. And when casting off, we are going to keep the design of 2 knit, 2 purl even while casting off. So let's begin with 2 knit, 1 and 2, and we want to keep it nice and loose but not too loose so that it should stay nice and stretchy. We'll take the first one and pull it over. Now we'll do a purl and pull the back one over, another purl and pull it over. Now knit and knit. Here we see how it's coming off nice and neat. Now that we've reached the end, we can cut off, leaving a little tail and pulling it through the loop. There we go. Now we won't need these big needles anymore, so we can put them away. And here we've got the whole body of the sweater already finished. And now it's time for the sleeves. So I'm going to be using this sock needle. I find this the easiest for sleeves, but you could also use double pointed needles or magic loop method, whichever works for you. We are going to begin picking up all of those stitches that we left on that piece of yarn. I prefer to pick up a few stitches and then pull out the piece of yarn just to make sure that I'm not losing any. Now I've got all the stitches on the needles, so I am going to place a stitch marker in the first stitch so that we'll remember where the row begins, since we need to know to make 6 rows of each color, just like we did the rest of the sweater. So now we have 1 row of green, and the stitches that are on the needles are counted as a row, so this is the second row of green. So now we need 4 more rows with the green. We'll take the yarn and begin knitting. Now the main difference between knitting in the round and knitting back and forth is that here we did the stockinette stitch, we did 1 knit, 1 purl row, and the garter stitch we did all knit, both sides knit. And in the round it's going to be backwards, so the stockinette we're going to knit only knit, and for the garter stitch we're going to make 1 knit and 1 purl row in the round. So now for the green we're just knitting. Okay, so since this is in the round, we're just going to continue knitting when we reach the end of the row. And now we're making the fourth row of green. And don't worry about that hole that stays over there from picking up the row, because later on we're going to close it with the tail from the beginning. So just continue on knitting. So now we've done 5 rows and we reached the first stitch on the row. And let me show you quickly how you can count. So we're counting the V's going up. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we said the ones on the needles are counted, so this is 6. Now we're going to begin with the brown. Here we go with the second color. And the first row is going to be a regular knit row, because think about it as finishing off the green. So the last row of the green should be knit. So we're just going to begin knitting with the second color. And I'm going to move the stitch marker up so that it'll be easier to find. So this row is really easy to see when we finish the row, since we just finish all the greens. So now the second row is going to be a purl row. So we're going to begin purling all around. Now we've reached again the end of the row, so we'll switch back to knitting and we'll continue making knit, purl rows until we have 6 rows of brown of the second color. And remember, the row that's on the needle is counted as a row. Once we're done the 6 rows with the brown, now we can switch back to the green. Make sure to bring it from under the brown, so the brown putting like this, and this one I'm bringing up here. We'll make the first one, and then I'm going to move the stitch marker back up so that I can make sure where is the beginning of the row. And so we'll continue that way, 6 rows of green, 6 rows of brown, until the sleeve is as long as we want. Once we've got the sleeve to the length that we need, we're going to finish off the sleeve with 6 rows of ribbing, just like we did on the bottom of the sweater. And we could cut off the brown yarn, the secondary yarn, since we're already finished with it. And we'll make the 6 rows of 2 knit, 2 purl ribbing. Once that's done and we've cast off, now we're going to repeat this whole sleeve process on the second side. Now that both sleeves are done, we are going to sew in all of these pieces of yarn. So we'll turn it inside out. and start with closing these little gaps that we have at the beginning of the sleeve. If you have a long enough tail from the beginning, you can use that. Mine is not long enough, so I'm going to take a different piece of yarn with a needle. And now we're going to pick up more or less in a circle over here so that we could pull it close tight. Here I've picked up all around, so now we'll pull it closed. Make a nice knot. And here our gap is closed. We could see it on the outside. It looks nice and neat. We'll do the same for the other sleeve. And now we'll just go around finding any loose ends and sew them in. If there's any gaps from yarn changes or things like that, we could close them up with the help of the tails. And once that's done, the sweater is pretty much done. You could choose to either leave it open, or you could add a sewn on zipper or a knitted on button band and add buttons, whichever you like. I'm going to leave it open for now, but I might add a zipper later with the sewing machine. And that's how you can make this gorgeous toddler size striped knit sweater in the Raglan top down. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and I'll see you next time. Bye!